Okay, so slightly different angle of approach, I guess, from this part of the day. What we're here really obviously today to learn about is the whole infrastructure piece, and a lot of today is really around that back-end infrastructure, around security, how do we protect our data. What I want to do is just really raise some thought processes here and some questions around where does that data end up, usually at one of these, a device of some sort, and that's really where we come in. So first question I just wanted to ask is who uses a mobile device, smartphone or tablet, for accessing their email primarily? Definitely me. I'd say that's a pretty high percentage. Okay, now part of that email could obviously be very sensitive information. As we know with email, it's a great way to stick attachments on there. We've had a lot of talk around that today already. So by default, all of a sudden we're into that situation of important documents going out via email. How do we control that email? And we've got some things in there already to deal with that. I'm going to talk around that in just a moment. But what about the content piece? So those Word documents, Excel, video files, hard to email. So how do we get access to that? How do we share information? This is really around getting right information to the right people at the right place. But obviously today's event really about under the right conditions and the ability to make changes and take actions based upon that. So we're going to cover a couple of things today around this. And I think the first bit is to understand when we talk around MDM, you might have heard that from Master Data Management, also mobile device management. But we talk around enterprise mobility management. And although I say enterprise, it doesn't matter whether it's a sole trader, a partnership, right through to a global organization. If everybody is using a smart device of some sort, or in fact, even otherwise, it could be barcode scanning in a supply chain business. Wherever there's a mobile device, there's always a risk of, do we know where all that data is, who's got what, and how many versions of it have they got? So there's 5 kind of key areas here that we just really want to touch on, questions to be asked. Security, good, we can cover that piece, right down to enabling encryption on device. That's fine, but what happens when we start getting into the other pieces? Device and email, it's almost a commodity now to talk around this is what we expect of a mobile device. But when we look at applications, this is opening up a whole new world. We're used to desktop computers. IT and whoever is involved in that piece will usually take complete control of how software is delivered to that under a whole host of rules. You can't connect devices, you can't put a CD in the drive, etc. But in mobile world, it's online. Everything's online. It's app stores. So how do we take controls there? What does that mean to us? And when we get to content management, funnily enough, there isn't actually a single inherent way of sharing content on any mobile platform. It requires an application. So which application? How do we know where that's come from? How do we test that for the usual security challenges? So I guess summarizing that piece is, can we treat a mobile device the same way as we treat a laptop? Answer, no. It's a very, very different way of thinking. Everybody's obviously picked up on the iPad revolution and what that means. But I think the important piece to understand here is that if you want to embrace mobility, then there are some changes you need to make. And I just want to refer back to Natalie Black, who spoke earlier from the Cabinet Office, and she talked around an oil company, Saudi Aramco, with a virus there that had a massive implication on their business. Now, the irony is they're in the process of rolling out a mobility strategy right now. Had they actually enabled all of their content and their users to be on tablets or smartphones, with the right systems in place, they would never have suffered those 30,000 desktops, because the inherent nature of mobile devices and sandboxing, again, that James Sherlock talked around earlier, actually makes this a more secure platform, ironically. The thing that we've got to understand is what's the mobility piece actually mean to us. There's a few extra pieces in there to think about. So beyond really thinking around those pieces and I suppose the ultimate challenge of, well, how do we treat this, then we really start looking at policies. But we're used to building policies because we've had policies for years. When you come down to Active Directory and you're thinking about who has access to what information, this is nothing new. So it doesn't need to be anything new necessarily for mobile devices. But how easy is it to access that data? So the kind of questions that you'll ask to create a policy are probably pretty similar. Who gets what and when? But by default, this is probably going to also take it outside the scope of an IT decision. Perhaps this is now involving HR, perhaps it's involving the C-level people in the organisation. So again, you sometimes need to take a step back and think about who's responsible for this. In terms of the content piece, what does that look like? So firstly, we've got to think about security. There's a whole host of policies there. Let's take advantage of the infrastructure that everybody's been talking around today and delivered to prevent, obviously, cybercrime and really promote the security of the business as a whole. But when we move into the content piece, we might want to be thinking around where does it end up? What can I do? What control do I have over that? And what happens when we do those magic 4 letters of BYOD? Does it suddenly become an impossible nightmare? It doesn't have to be the case at all, but we do need to think of it from a strategic point of view. So the architecture that you've already got, you've spent a huge amount of money on investing into. The last thing you want to do if you suddenly realise that mobile devices are appearing is to suddenly have to change all that. Do I have to change the infrastructure? How am I going to install? Who's going to manage this? Do I have to go out and recruit? Do I need a whole load of people to manage 1,000 mobile devices when, to be fair, we had 3 people managing 1,000 desktops perfectly comfortably before? Not the case. It doesn't have to be there. But again, it's a good time to take stock of what's available, what technology is out there to enable this to be facilitated in such a way that you could still have what you want. Actually, you can add value in a number of ways to how the business processes as a whole. Lots of talk around this bit today, but again, just to hit on this, and there's lots of different numbers floating around how much is it going to cost, because with data's now on a mobile device, and I'm going to go off and do something, and we've had lots of speakers today talking about what that looks like, whether it's £47 per record, or we often see the volume of that averaging 1.7 million to an average business in the UK, or these sort of figures even in the US. But what we can do is we can safely say we don't want it. I think that's the important piece. So what do we need in place to really help with that? Well, again, ownership is an interesting question, because do we have to retain ownership to be able to keep control of our data? We would argue no. No, you don't. What you do need to do is understand what the rules and the boundaries are, because if we never want to lose anything, we shouldn't really give anybody paper or pen, because they probably might write something down one day and leave it on their desk. So we've got to be realistic as well. Can we stop people from being able to do anything on their device? IT's dream is yes, and usually the first question we get is, can we turn everything off? Can we stop the end user from being able to have access to any data whatsoever? And the usual question from us is, well, why? Because, how is that going to be a productive employee? What happens is several devices turn up. So how many people in the room have more than one smartphone or tablet on them right now? Got 2 here, so there you go. Good example. If we look at emerging countries, we often see actually it's one device, because they've embraced that and thought about the strategy for it. How many devices do we want each person to have? What does that do for our Wi-Fi infrastructure alone? So there are ways of making this viable, but of course what we need to think around is terms of use. Do we want to be able to GPS track employee devices? No. Do we want to be able to see your personal apps you've downloaded from your app store against your own user ID? No, you shouldn't have a right to see that as well. So all of these pieces need to be in place, and these are the questions you obviously need to ask. Compliance. So what happens when it all goes wrong? Well, a compliance engine can make all the difference in the world. If you go back just a couple of years, we could wipe a device. Brilliant. That's fantastic. What happens? You end up with some bits of metal and a battery, and it ends up going back a ticket raised into IT to restage, push out to the right person. It's making work and actually stopping someone from being productive. With the nature of sandboxing, we then became the case of, well, we can take away the business information, the information in the university. Haven't got access to the college data anymore. That's fine. But equally, how do we get them back accessible straight back into there when we've decided that a breach has happened? So why not go one stage further and say, well, why don't we just tell them that they've removed an app? I know my 4-year-old will probably do that all the time if he had a chance. Remove my jailbreak detect app in there to make sure the device is safe. Do I actually want the whole thing to suddenly disappear? No, I'd like to be told and given 5 minutes to put it back on there, notified, and perhaps my manager notified so I know what's going on. And if I don't, then I'll take away VPN, I'll take away access to email, I can take away various different policies, access to your SharePoint, your web dev servers, FTP, whatever it is, but you decide what those rules are. Because what we really, really want to do, we've invested a lot of money in our mobile devices, we want them to stay out, we want them to be in the hands of the users being productive with their business. Actually, there's 2 extra pieces I want to throw in there with compliance. A lot of people say to us, well, Exchange, Microsoft Exchange, great, we can actually do remote wipes on Windows Phone 7 and other things. We can ask Exchange to go and do that wipe. One question, how do you know it's happened? You told it to do it. Were they in service? Were they connected at the time? Were they abroad on holiday? Who knows? But how do you know that important data, we've looked at the data breaches, has actually been removed from that device when you've suddenly realised they've left the business? How is that automated? Apple came up with a great thing, Find My iPhone. Perfect. So Find My iPhone, that's a free technology. Why do I need GPS tracking in my devices and the ability to wipe it? Because if I take the SIM card out, it doesn't work. So that's not much help either. What's really important is to say, well, I need to know whatever state that device is. If they take the SIM card out, we should still know where that device is because it doesn't affect the data. The data's not on the SIM card. So how do we measure? What's the idea of success? Oh, sorry, I've gone one too far. How do we measure success, return on investment? That's the usual question. We're going to go mobile, but how do we measure it? What's it actually going to do? Well, we can look at happy employees. How do we measure that? Size of the smile? I don't know. But employees want to use the devices that they feel comfortable with. Chances they'll be more productive with it. And what we really don't want to do is have to manage 2, 3, 4 devices per person. What we'd like to do, actually, why don't we just cut the cost of having to provide devices, let them bring their own ones, we'll set the rules. But then that raises the challenge of, well, hold on, we need to now trust those devices. We've got some trust with our employees, of course, but what about the devices themselves? How do we know when that device is going to work with the rules that we've set? So again, be prepared to ask those questions for any support that you seek. How do I know which Android device, which Apple device, which Microsoft device is going to support us? And I just wanted to touch base back again on a previous speaker regarding malware and viruses. I did literally a quick search today on today's current stats and just typed in antivirus into the 3 different app stores, Apple's, Google's and Microsoft's. And what was really interesting was Apple's came back with 18 hits for antivirus. The irony is most of those were games and you can shoot things that look like viruses. There was another one that stops you from being able to take a virus that comes into your iPad, iPhone, iPod Touch, whatever it is, and send it to a PC where all of a sudden we're into the security issue again. So it has no effect on the mobile device because of the nature of sandboxing. So ironically, there are no viruses for iOS devices because of the infrastructure, the way it's actually built. And then you look at Microsoft, it's a similar situation. So with Microsoft Phone and so forth, again, the nature of the sandboxing and the design of that device says it's incredibly hard, never impossible. We're in a room of cybercrime specialists here. It's never impossible, but the chances are it's highly unlikely that you're ever going to have malware or virus at this end, at the mobile end user end. Yes, at the other end, but not so much at this end. The irony is you go to Android and look at Google's offering, there are 100,000 hits for antivirus in the Google Play Store. Why is that? Because it's open source, because there are a million different variants of it. You can download apps for Android devices outside of Google's Play Store. It's not part of their own infrastructure. However, there is some fantastic work going on right now with people like Samsung and HTC who are actually filling in all those gaps. And all those gaps are really, really important to you. And you're saying, well, hold on, we want to support bring your own device, or we want corporate devices. We need to know which devices we can trust, under which circumstances. What can I do? So there's lots and lots of questions out there, and really that's just me saying, ask yourself lots of questions. How can we support? We're the largest enterprise mobility provider by far on the planet, so it's touched 1,200 employees now and forever growing. This is the fastest scaling piece because any organisation of any size, 1 or 100,000, 400,000 device deployment just happening right now in a whole country. So we can take care of those needs and we can scale. So that's the other question is it scalable? Because there's a lot of nerves. Right now, 2012 was the start, 2013. The question is, I've tried 10, I've tried 20, I feel comfortable. Hold on, there's people over there that want to do something different, and over there want to do something different. So, again, seeking the advice, what could we do there? So, the Simplify Enterprise Mobility, I just wanted to finish on that. If it's not simple, you will all hate it, and all your end users will hate it, and it will be a complete flop. So that's a strange, negative way to sum up, but there you go. Some questions to ask. It is easy, it can be done. And yes, you can all purchase from us today and go live by tomorrow. So there's a positive news.
Thank you very much.
All right,
indeed.
thanks very much.